So yeah, firstly, man, thank you so much for, coming here and chatting with me today. Um, it's a conversation worth having, and I'm glad I get to have it with you. Um, how about before we get even, jump into it, just for people that are unaware of what's going on in, East Turkestan, maybe you give a bit of a background on that and who the Uyghur people are, because I'm sure there's, unfortunately, a lot of people that might not even have an idea.
Yeah, definitely. So, I think a good place to start is just the current day and what's happening right now is the Uyghurs are a Turkic group of people, so we share a lot in common in terms of our culture, our heritage, and ethnically with people like Kazakhs from Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, all these groups, Turkey. And so we share a lot in common with them. And we're in this region that the Chinese government likes to call the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. Now, that name is kind of a misnomer because autonomy not is probably the last thing that Uyghurs have, and Xinjiang itself means new frontier, which is a
Oh,
very colonialist look
mm-hmm.
towards this land that has been the homeland of the Uyghur people for um, hundreds, if not thousands, of years. So I think that a very brief primer on the history that brings us to today is millions of Uyghurs are living under this authoritarian regime that is currently committing a genocide. There's no other way to say it. This is what's happening is a genocide, and they've instituted these mass camps where they detain Uyghurs who they believe are a threat, and if they're not a threat, they make up a reason to put you in there anyway. So simple things like having the Quran, which Uyghurs are a mostly Muslim group, or having a beard, or wearing the traditional Uyghur hat, the dokba. All these are good enough reasons, outside of these camps, what we're seeing, of course, is a police state using technology and just sheer brute force to keep everyone repressed. So we have this program called the Integrated Joint Operations Platform. And what it does is it monitors data from your phone that's transmitted from your car using checkpoints, collecting data, biometrics, everything, and creating this personnel profile and using it to determine whether or not you're a threat. And so using this and an arbitrary scoring, arbitrary marking, things that aren't actually crimes. So, for example, like I was saying before, having a beard or having the Quran could be enough to land you in there, and because it would make you a threat in the eyes of the IJOP, in the eyes of the CCP, and the amount of people who are in your home are monitored. Sometimes there are even cameras attached to your front door to watch who's coming in, who's coming out, and of course you're monitored at every point. They always know what you're doing,
Right.
which is it's an oppressive atmosphere that is on top already of this genocide that's being committed, where Uyghur women are forcibly sterilized, sexual violence rampant in these camps, um, intellectuals, academics are being targeted and disappeared. And what we're seeing is this steady erasure of the Uyghur people and culture by the Chinese government.
Wild. I did not actually know that that was the Chinese definition for Xinjiang. I didn't. What you said it was called New Frontier.
New frontier,
Oof.
new region, along those lines. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah. that alone, is pretty dusty. And
Yeah, it's enough to make you go oof
yeah,
when you hear it.
it's like, yeah, I can only relate on very small levels, but it's like, for me, it's like we already criticize like gentrifiers when they come to, unsavory neighborhoods and say, oh, we just, found. And so like, if you were to add on, like, if they were coming out here and like literally like beating the shit out of us, then it's just like, bro, you could have stopped at the beginning, you know. So so the name recognized by you and most, I guess, Uyghurs. Or, sorry, do you mind pronouncing? I always try to get it right because I don't want to sound like a filthy Westerner. Um,
Yeah, it's Uyghur, but it's fine. It's
okay,
fine if you say Uyghur.
okay, it's
Everyone
fine.
understands it, and like a lot of times, I I'll say Uyghur
Yeah,
just so that people get it, and I don't have to go into an explanation like, oh, Uyghur is actually Uyghur, but it's just whatever.
right, fair.
Yeah.
So yeah, Xinjiang is, you guys know it by East Turkestan, and you guys, like, do you like when you see reporting being done and they call it Xinjiang, does like a part of you kind of feel like, like it's not
Yeah.
that? Yeah, eh?
Yeah. It definitely is. It's frustrating to see, and I don't speak for all Uyghurs when I say East Turkestan, but I think that the majority of Uyghurs prefer to use a name that, at the very least, is our own.
Mm-hmm.
It's not given to us, and it's not a representation of oppression and authority that has used every opportunity to exert power to repress, oppress, and destroy us.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Very, very fair. Um, so just for, I guess, some backstory on me and why I felt the reason to have you on is because uh, I'm a leftist. I'd consider myself a leftist, and I think like, with the, oh, thank you for the cheer, Blossom. Yeah, with the more and more visibility being brought on East Turkestan and Uyghur people, I'm seeing more and more problematic things being said by uh, far leftists, aka Tankies. We'll go on to define Tankies in a second, but yeah, just outright, denial of what's going on, or if it's not denial, defending it, or if it's not defending it, it's saying things like, well, America did this, so, you know,
Yeah,
so
man.
it's rough, yeah, and I can only imagine how rough it is for you, because like when I see it, I just, I'm already like shaking my head and getting pretty pissed. So, and I'm not, directly affected by it. So I wanted to, use the small platform that I do have to, work towards making the discourse more nuanced and, calling out bullshit when we see bullshit, because I feel like that's should be our job. So yeah, Tankies. Um,
Gotta love them.
gotta do we? I don't know. But no, essentially what a tanky is like a hardline Stalinist is what it was a constant theme that I saw in the definitions that I saw, but it's a far left, of course, communist who believes that, like, in the political system of the Soviet Union, and oftentimes they're sympathizers and defenders of the CCP, China, Serbia, etc. even in cases when there's other not as far left communists are criticizing their policies or actions. For instance, such a person favors overseas interventions by Soviet-style states and defends these regimes when they engage in human rights violations, like China, and wishes to establish a similar system in other countries such as Britain and America. And just for clarity, when I say China, I really mean the CCP, and I'm going to make an effort to say the CCP. But yeah, that would you say that's an apt description of Tanky?
Yeah, I my abbreviation is, you know, nut jobs, but it's probably a little more technically accurate.
Yeah. That's
Technically
very
accurate.
fair. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, if I'm being honest, that's usually my description as well. So yeah, that's what a tanky is, and then another important definition is what genocide is, because I feel like people have a very high standard, I guess, that they feel needs to be met in order for something to be considered genocide,
Mhm.
because it's so commonly used to describe, of course, the Holocaust. But genocide is really just when any group of ethnic people are being and intentionally and actively dismantled and destroyed. You don't need to literally send millions of people in, gas tanks and kill them. It can be a slow and agonizing thing. There's also ways to kill or destroy a group of people without actually, outright killing them, like shooting them or whatever. There's cultural genocide, which is kind of what's continuing to happen here in North America with indigenous Canadians and indigenous Americans. They're not, of course, they're still being mistreated and treated in incredibly inhumane ways, but they're not outright, being shot and killed in the streets or hung or anything like that. So, wanted to get those definitions. Do you feel like that's a fair definition for that as well?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, and this is actually what I noticed when I was on Reddit on World News when the Uyghur Tribunal made their verdict that China was committing a genocide. And so a lot of the comments quoted this one thing that Sir Jeffrey Nice said, which was the tribunal found no evidence of mass killings, and then they would quote that and say, "How can you call it a genocide if there's no mass killings? Doesn't it just cheapen the word?" And I think, like you were saying, a lot of people really missed the point about what a genocide is. Um, and I think that's because we've popularized this mass killing as the worst type of genocide, and it becomes the archetype
Mm-hmm.
of genocide,
Mm-hmm.
and then it's very difficult for people to recognize other forms of it. But if we look at the 1948 Genocide Convention, which has been ratified by every single country,
Yeah.
including China,
Mm-hmm.
we see that some of the ways that genocide can be committed is in part or in whole attempting to suppress birth and birth rates
Yes.
of
Yeah.
a population,
Yeah.
which has been happening. Others include mass displacement and movement, the destruction of culturally significant landmarks or buildings or heritage in a way that would erase culture, um, the use of fear and other, you know, shocking and horrifying uh, tactics against the population, which includes rape, mass sexual assault, sexual violence, these things. So when you're looking at the actual definition of genocide, this fits a lot of
Yeah.
the bill.
Yeah.
You know,
And like you were saying, it only really needs to be one of those, right? To be,
Exactly.
yeah, yeah, exactly. We really need to. It shouldn't take, our worst atrocities in histories for in order for us to say like, all right, maybe this is fucking enough. It's like I don't want it to get to a point where it's concentration camps and gas chambers. Like it shouldn't take that for like intervention, and it's a very weird standard to put on
Yeah.
people's lives. Yeah,
You want to wait until it's literally too late
to save
to
people.
to
Yeah,
do anything.
yeah,
It strikes me as odd.
yeah. It's a very very odd argument, as is a lot of the arguments that we see from Tankies. And what I think it is really, because I really make an effort to understand these kinds of things, because I just I don't like not getting it. I guess. And I see these kinds of things very similarly. It's like arguments that are founded on distrust rather than any substantial, evidence to support their argument. It's like I don't like the U.S. because they've given me reason to distrust them, and giving them very fair reason to distrust them.
Yeah.
Therefore, anyone that opposes the U.S. must be, on my side, and that really sets you up for to one be taken advantage of, and two, it just like we're seeing now, it blinds you so much so that you're unable to empathize with people that need that empathy. They need your help. Would you yeah, what's your thoughts like
Yeah.
when you see these kinds of
Well, exactly. I think there are plenty of valid criticisms of the U.S.
yeah,
And of
the
the
Western world, I guess?
the liberal order in general. Like
Yeah.
you can definitely critique that, but I think what's happened is you have a lot of people who are disillusioned with how things work in the West, how in particular the United States operates, and they create this sort of false dichotomy for themselves where they think, okay, well, US bad, so the next biggest thing must be good.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
next biggest thing I mean in terms of superpowers that are vying for hegemony, because that we shouldn't make a mistake about this. China is vying to not only unseat the United States, but to take its place. There, there's no real intention to just make no superpower.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
that's kind of how it operates, and there are a lot of reasons why people should criticize the decisions of the U.S. government, but to create this sort of simple black and white decision for yourself, where okay, well, if the U.S. is bad, then China must be good, is ridiculous. And the it's really odd that we attribute these sort of inherent labels to different parts of the world without really thinking twice. So
Mm-hmm.
the West is imperialist. The West is colonizing. But the East, or the global South, is always the victim.
Mm-hmm.
They're always powerless. They always have their agency taken away from them. And that in itself is kind of a very Western centric point of view, that only the West has agency and the West does things to others, while the global South has it done to them.
Mm-hmm.
It takes away the agency and capability of nations and governments and their ability to do great, or in this case,
Harm.
horrific
Yeah.
things.
Yeah. It's just infantilizing them, really.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's tough, and I think like I've gotten in. Well, really, only I guess like one. I've engaged sometimes online with like this kind of discourse, but I don't. I've only had like I guess like one pretty significant discussion, and it was directly related, like to the Uyghur genocide. And it was like a friend who I hadn't seen in a while, and the pandemic, like it did a bit of a number on her, and she spent a lot of time online and on Twitter, and she had her own like she wasn't from here or the U.S., so she had her own like weird relationship with like immigration and stuff like that. And we were talking about one thing and then another and another, and eventually we got to the Uyghur genocide, and yeah, she started saying kind of like tanky ish stuff, and I was pushing back. I didn't like mention this was after I knew you, and I tried avoiding that because I try to have this kind of like discourse without bringing in anecdotal evidence at first, just so I can try to use, I
Yeah,
guess.
arguing on the merits of the evidence.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly. I know, saying things like, yeah, but I get that, America is very problematic. I'll be the first to tell you that, I'm a black man. I get it. Like, yes, America is not great, but that doesn't stop, from other countries from being not great either. And she was just kind of like, just kept pushing back, and it just like I felt like it really wasn't getting anywhere, and it got to the like to the point where it was just becoming way too hard to hear, and I was just like, hey, I know somebody that's that's Uyghur. They have family that they can't speak to anymore. They have family literally going through it, and thankfully she kind of took like a moment of like introspection, and she was just like, wow, I've never met someone that's even known a Uyghur person before, and I don't want to partake in invalidating their experience and trauma, and I'm
well,
sorry.
it's always so interesting to me when tankies start denying it because who do they think? Like I am, like they've never met Uyghurs before.
Yeah.
It's very unlikely that they will. There's not too many of us outside of the homeland or in the diaspora,
Mm-hmm.
and like, do they do they think that we're just not real? Do they think that we're just some kind of manufactured concept that's designed to stoke dissent in China or
I
something?
think so, man. I think that's really it. Like, I think they think that you're just a talking point, rather than,
Yeah,
which is scary. It's like, man, these are real people, man. They're going through it, and to me, it's just like I can't help but think like, holy shit, like if we didn't, you know, if the Holocaust didn't happen and it are happening right now, this would be what they would be saying. So it's just like it's crazy for me. You know what I'm saying? It's like,
yeah.
holy shit, like we haven't we like I think
And
in
there
a
are
lot of ways,
people.
yeah.
There are still people who say that stuff.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like it's kind of like that weird like shoehorn theory where it's like if you get extremely far right, then sometimes like far left arguments intersect, and we're kind of like
Yeah.
seeing that.
Some, I mean, shoehorn, like the horseshoe theory has
Yeah,
problems of
shoehorn,
it's
horseshoe.
got problems of its own
Yeah,
own.
100%.
But yeah, it's interesting, where the intersection between tankies and Nazis come in, where it's like, that's fine, just kill them.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's like it's as conspiracy theorists thought in general. Like like as you can see, I'm black, and I have a lot of course, black friends that I grew up with, but there's a lot of like they espouse kind of like a lot of the same conspiracies that Nazis do, like the whole like Jews running the world and shit like that is very rampant in like these like I'd probably consider them far left spaces as well. Like I don't think like they really align themselves anywhere politically, but like Hotep talk is very much tanky talk, and tanky talk sometimes is very much far right talk, and it's just it's weird because and I think that's what it's like. All it is really arguments being founded on distrust. I think that's just like inevitably what happens. Is like if your argument is always I don't trust this, therefore it must be the opposite. You're always gonna kind of end up in this position where you're anyone in power is gonna be like the enemy, and it's just like, man, that's not a way to do things.
Yeah. Quick question: what is Hotep?
Oh, sorry. Hotep is like pro black but problematic. Like they subscribe to the belief that Egypt was only black, and
Okay.
they're very heteronormative and often anti-Semitic because they'll say things like they are the true children of Israel and stuff like that. And yeah, it's a whole nother rabbit hole to fall into. It's
Is
like,
that like the Black Israelites?
yeah, usually they've kind of become like a big umbrella, as like most conspiracies do nowadays. Sorry.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's essentially what that is.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I said, I just see a lot of conspiracies wherever I go, unfortunately.
Yeah. That's
Yeah, and the common trait is just a big distrust towards superpowers, which is like fair, but it's just like you can't let that be your main argument.
yeah. And I mean, you know what? I think a healthy amount of distrust for any government probably
A
probably
good
pretty
thing.
solid,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah,
Um, but I think that with all these conspiracy theories, it's just the internet has made the bar to publish so low, you
mm,
know, and in a lot of ways it's amazing because you have people on Twitch like you who can just go out there and create content
yeah,
and can talk to people. On the other hand, I can go on Reddit, go to conspiracy or Arsino or something and be like, Uyghurs aren't real,
yeah,
not
yeah,
real, they're
yeah,
all birds, you know, and just type that in and it can take off.
yeah,
It just gets everywhere. And so like it I mean, I hate to blame the internet for everything,
yeah,
but I really think the proliferation of conspiracy theories and the vastness of information has just been made so much easier because of this low clearance to get your information into people's brains.
yeah.
Uh,
It's a double-edged sword, and unfortunately, like not a lot of people have the tools or whatever to think critically, because also the failings in our education systems all around the Western world. So it's yeah, we're really fighting an uphill battle. But I'm curious to hear like if you've had any experiences either on or offline with tankies that you'd like to share.
um, you know, I try not to engage
Yeah,
because I used to love arguing, but
yeah,
now it's
yeah.
just
Same.
like I'm just so tired of it, you know? Someone's like, it's all fake. Just read this one gray zone article and it'll tell you the truth. It's like, cool, yeah, I'll take a look at it. Thanks, man. It's just like Uyghurs aren't real. They're all a bunch of robots. It's like, you're right. I was made in a factory. God, call me a CIA shill. It's like, mm,
All right. Yeah.
my only problem with that is like you would think that as a CIA shill, I would be getting paid like CIA shill money. You know,
Yeah.
instead of I'm being paid human rights advocate money,
Yeah.
which is it pales in comparison.
Just getting
Um,
none of the benefits and all of the cons.
yeah, but I see my sister. She engages with tankies a lot, and she'll show me some of these Twitter threads, and it's just on and on and on, and she's just like talking to people, and I understand, and I really think it's important to have this discourse out there, if not necessarily to convince tankies, but to convince people who are skeptical for whatever reason,
Mm.
and to show them the light. I just, the energy that it takes, I don't have it anymore. I'm so tired of people denying my existence or the right for my people to exist that it's just boring to me. But I, I can give you an example of some interesting tanky talk that I saw
Please.
recently.
Yeah.
So at the University of Calgary, the Gauntlet is the student newspaper there, and I actually used to volunteer there and write a few articles. And in 2018, I wrote an opinion piece about what was happening. And just recently, someone published something about the Beijing 2022 Olympics,
Mm.
and they started essentially, parroting all these, it looks pretty compelling at first. All these talking points that were basically like, there's not enough evidence to call it a genocide. How can it be a genocide if poverty rates are lowering and birth rates are actually increasing? Which, point of order here is that, yes, poverty alleviation is a thing, and poverty alleviation has been this huge concept that the CCP has pushed about East Turkestan. And yeah, I mean, poverty has been alleviated, but a lot of it comes under duress, and a lot of it involves dramatically changing the customs, culture, and way of life that people are used to. And another point about this concept of poverty alleviation is that it still leaves behind a massive amount of inequality, whether it's racial between Han Chinese and Uyghurs, and class, because Uyghurs tend to be, even in their own homeland, lower class citizens, and you know just when you're adding that all up, yeah, I mean, you're bringing people into the folds of society, and removing poverty that way. But the the lifestyle, and this is all very like complex sociological analysis that I myself don't, I'm not an academic, so I don't have a full grasp on this. But all these concepts and actions and programs are rooted in um, the inherent belief that the Han Chinese way of life is superior, and that it must be shared with all Uyghurs. And that's kind of where it comes from. Um, and I recognize that I just lost the thread here because we were talking about a Gauntlet article.
All
so,
good,
so,
man. Yeah, I'm here for it.
so, yeah, I mean, I saw that and it kind of blew my mind to see it. And I was reading through it and it's, geez, Louise, you're just spouting CCP propaganda here. Um, yeah, it was frustrating. It was frustrating to see.
Is the poverty rate lowering also related to it? I imagine like there's more Han Chinese people moving in there, right? Like, doesn't that also skew the numbers a bit?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that they're looking at, well, first of all, yeah, there have been huge efforts to increase mass migration of Han Chinese into East Turkestan. And even now, I think the demographic shift, sorry,
Mm-hmm.
that orange chicken,
Yeah.
um, it's gone like a 90% Uyghur to 45%
Holy.
in at least in Urumqi, from what I understand, which is the capital city. So within the span of 30 to 40 years, that was a massive, absolutely massive demographic shift. Um, and that kind of ties into what I was saying earlier about this inequality, is that a lot of these, it's not like the wealth in East Turkestan was created by Uyghurs, or even Han Chinese who had lived there. It was created by these companies that were brought over from China to Urumqi, set up operations, and essentially a form of colonialist mercantilism, right? Where they extracted the wealth of the region and used it to benefit their home colony. And the analogy is should be considered a very loose
Yeah.
one. Um, it's it's imperialism, but it's not like it's this mix of being a colony and then being like an additional expansion of land, and it can kind of blur the lines when it's right there, and it's not overseas or whatever. But that's kind of how it's operated, and so Uyghurs get left behind, and the CCP and all these traditionally Han Chinese companies get rich, and they bring in their own employees, and they
Mm,
institute, one minority, one Uyghur policies where you only really need to hire one, and you've met your quota.
classic.
Yeah, so I mean that's kind of how it was operating, and so over time it created a staggering wealth inequality.
Wow. Well, what is like I kind of when I'm confronted with this kind of stuff, and when I'm confronted with racism, I guess I kind of like have my own like thought process that I go through. Like usually it's like shock or anger, or at this point, it's just like, all right, is that the best you got? But then I kind of take a step back and take myself out of it and reflect, and I'm like, this is just a case of ignorance, and or this person is hurting in their own way and they're trying to throw their hurt onto me. And I kind of just like recenter myself, and I just remember, all right, this is why I'm fighting, this is what I'm fighting for, and this is what I'm fighting to eradicate. I'm curious to know, like, what is your kind of like process that you take when you're confronted with, I imagine it happens in a very different way, because I hope that people aren't just coming up to you and being like, hey, China's great. Like, I don't think, whereas, like, I'll get weird stares. It's just not a one-to-one thing, but I'm curious to know, like, yeah, what is your thought initially, and then how do you, therapize yourself?
Yeah, I mean, it at first it was just anger, and a lot of it I think still comes from a place of anger. It
Mm.
it really comes from this frustration. And I remember reading somewhere that anger is the emotion of injustice, that you perceive an injustice, and so you feel angry because you feel this need to rectify it. And I think that's a very accurate definition of anger in the case when I see denial or skepticism or anything like that, because I get angry. I'm angry that people who don't know me, who don't know any Uyghurs, who don't know the situation that we are dealing with here or that our parents dealt with back home, that they can assume that it's all okay. That the luxury, the privilege for them to be able to post on Instagram and say, this is all just US Western propaganda is staggering. It's incredible. It's an invalidation of the right for Uyghurs to exist,
Mm.
essentially. And it's saying that, oh, your uncles weren't in a concentration camp. Your grandfather didn't die because of neglect by the CCP. Like, you actually can talk to your family. You can visit. And so it it's an invalidation of a lived experience for me personally, and for the millions, uh, if that, of Uyghurs who live in the diaspora,
Yeah.
and the actual millions of Uyghurs who are under this authoritarian regime and are suffering, whether in camps, in forced labor programs, or outside of them, just trying to live their lives while this shadow lingers over them.
Yeah, man, that's heavy. Sorry, it's really fucking tough to go through. How are you feeling in regards to the Beijing protests and the independent investigation? Is this Yeah, I'm curious because I find like oftentimes when I do have when we do have like these wins for humanity, it always kind of feels like, oh, but this. So I'm curious to know, is like, is this a positive, or is there also a but this that maybe people are overlooking?
Um, well, so I think first an acknowledgement of the fact that the last couple of weeks have been kind of incredible in terms of progress made for Uyghur people. We have, I believe now we have 7 different countries partaking in a diplomatic boycott. That's the US, the UK, um, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, um, Lithuania, and Belgium. That is 7.
Sweet.
Scotland said it too, but they can't do foreign affairs stuff on their own, so it's the UK.
Right.
Um, and that's great news. You know, for the longest time, we weren't even sure if that was going to happen.
Hmm.
Like we just kind of were hoping because the U.S. government and other governments were dead silent. Parliament uh, was speaking about it. It's the Canadian Parliament too. And back in February, our Canadian Parliament passed a motion recognizing the Uyghur genocide, and they had made an amendment to uh, lobby the IOC to change the games, the location of the games, or implement a boycott if the genocide continues. And then we just didn't talk about it. And it's December, and the games are in February. And so there was a 11 months where we were just pushing, and like I know a lot of activists, a lot of Uyghur activists who put in so much effort um, to to make it a possibility. Like my friend Zumratai, and she's a program manager at World Uyghur Congress, and she's like the amount of work that she's put into this is incredible. The amount of work from Hong Kong activists, Tibetan activists to make this a reality has been just amazing, and it's good to see it. And we also saw the Uyghur Tribunal delivering their verdict, a determination that the CCP is committing genocide, um, which is, you know, it's a bittersweet kind
Yeah.
of celebration where you're like,
Yeah. Right.
yeah, this is great, and then you're just thinking, oh shit, well, it's genocide.
Yeah.
Um, but it's relieving. It's a it it's an affirmation of what we're experiencing, what we're going through, and it kind of says we're not we're not crazy.
Yeah.
Here's a
No. Yeah.
here's a body of experts who agree with what we're saying based on the evidence that we have, um, and so that's been amazing to see as well. Um, actually, and sorry, just the one last thing is the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, which in the US would seek to ban any import of any product that was made with Uyghur forced labor from entering the United States, which is
Wild.
amazing. And, trying to apply it as well to the USMCA. So it would have to apply to Mexico and Canada, which would be amazing.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm looking at, I just saw a quick update that it didn't go through the Senate yet. It was supposed to, but there's some shenanigans going on. But
As
the bill
always.
was, as always, right?
Yeah.
Um, I still don't understand the process of like how Congress fully works, but it's interesting to see. That's for sure.
I think there's people in Congress that don't understand the way Congress works, so you're not
Probably,
alone.
but yeah, I mean, they reconciled the bill. I was a skeptic. I genuinely thought that because they passed 2 versions of the bill, they would have to take the time to reconcile and agree on a compromise bill.
Right.
And I thought for sure that this was just a way for them to make it look like progress without doing anything. Just pass 2 different bills and then sit on the reconciliation. But they reconciled it. The House passed it through. It's sitting in the Senate, and with any luck, we get it passed sometime soon. And then once the president signs it, it's a law. And like that's something that Uyghurs have been fighting for a couple of years now, you know. It's been a big week the last couple of weeks with a lot happening, and it's great to see. But as always, it always seems to come a little late
Yeah.
and just not enough. You know, maybe it was enough before, but now we need to implement it faster. We need to take these things and really use them, and especially with a diplomatic boycott, it really should be the least that governments do, and we're kind of seeing it as this is the most they're willing to give
For now.
for now.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so in your opinion, there isn't, I guess, buts yet. It's more like you're trying to wait to see what's happening next. Like there nothing. Does anything right now feel like there's maybe like an ulterior motive for you, or yeah, because that's something I always wonder as well. Like if it, like when it's something at local politics, I guess you can say, all right, well, yeah, this is local politics, so it kind of feels a bit more genuine and closer to the people. But whenever I see, yeah, sweeping, like, one that like comes to mind is like, Biden's efforts to, make in his efforts to fight, incarceration rates. And while on paper that sounds really good and looks really good, but really what it's been is, house arrests have become more of a bigger thing, and it's now putting the cost instead of on the state. It's putting the cost on the people because now they have to pay, for the leg, the ankle bracelets, and they have to put a monitoring and all that kind of stuff. So I'm curious if this feels in any way like that for you.
At least as of right now, I mean, these are all things that we want and
Sweet.
that we've been fighting for, and as long as, especially with the UFLP, becomes law, and not only a law, but if they enforce it properly, that would be amazing to see, because then we have all these companies that are complicit in the Uyghur genocide by using Uyghur forced labor that absolutely have to get their shit together.
Yeah.
They cannot any longer sit on their hands and say, "Oh, we're respecting regulatory standards," or blah 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 blah, or blah 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 blah. No, it's a rebuttable presumption. If you're operating in the region, if you're operating there, then you're complicit, and so you need to stop. And that's what we want.
Sweet. To take it back to Tankies for a sec. Sometimes when the argument is going back and forth, they'll be like, well, so yeah, how would you recommend non-Uyghur folk respond to some of these arguments, especially if opposing arguments are coming to the defense of Chinese people? Like that's always like a stun lock for me. It's just like, like they're kind of scapegoating and using Chinese people rather than the CCP as like a shield to what they're saying, and they say things like you're just stoking, uh, uh, what's it called, yellow, yeah,
Yellow fear.
yeah, I think it's yellow fear.
That doesn't sound right. I think I was about to say something terrible. I think
but
I
anti-Asian
yellow
hate
fever,
works
and I
well.
was like, oh,
No, you're
thanks.
stoking yellow fever, but yeah, yeah.
Uh,
What's your responses to that?
uh, good question. Yeah, I think two areas to come at this is, well, first of all, people who claim that calling out this genocide, the human rights abuses of the CCP, is contributing to anti-Asian hate.
Mm-hmm.
Just a side note, is it anti-Asian hate or is it anti-Asian hate?
Is it anti? The former, I believe. Yeah, anti-Asian.
Okay, so
Anti,
people
yeah,
people who
it's a weird sentence now that I think about it.
yeah
Anti-Asian sentiment. Let's just say that
yeah
because it's too negative.
when you when you hear that argument, it kind of annoys me because Uyghurs are Asian too, and
Facts, facts.
Central Asians are Asians,
Yeah,
and we tend to be kind of erased from that conversation a lot of the time. And I think, um, in a lot of ways, Central Asians and South Asians um, really feel that erasure, right? Because when people think of Asian, they think of East Asian or Southeast Asian, but they rarely think about South Asian, Indian, um, Pakistani, Bangladesh, or Central Asian people.
yeah.
And you know when they say, "Oh, you're contributing to anti-Asian hate or anti-Asian sentiment," I who really is contributing to anti-Asian hate or sentiment? Is it the people calling out the CCP for their atrocities, or is it the CCP committing atrocities
Mm.
against Asian people? And I mean that's kind of a reductive argument, and it doesn't really apply to the North American context. But when we think about it, when we think about anti-Asian hate, I think it is important to differentiate the CCP and the Chinese people, the state and the people. I think it's important to point out that it's not like the Han Chinese population is directly responsible for it, but I think we also need to recognize there's a level of complicity,
Mm.
and whether or not that comes from um, generations of growing up in this environment where you have now associated China, the CCP, and the Chinese people in one. The CCP has done a very good job of uh, associating those together and making it so that when you speak about China or when you criticize the CCP, now it seems like you're also criticizing the Chinese people. But I think it's also, I mean, we should recognize that they are different entities.
Yeah,
They're distinct. The
yeah.
CCP is not the Chinese people, but that a lot of there are a lot of Chinese people, whether in China or outside of it, that do support the CCP, and I think that a lot of that might be blind trust, rather than or a need to defend yourself after generations of discrimination against uh, you and your people. And so I think it's a natural reaction to want to defend your country. But I think it really can blind you to the realities of what this authoritarian regime is doing. Um, but I also want to acknowledge that there are lots of Han Chinese people who recognize what's happening and are really, really strong allies. And an example is there's an app called Clubhouse. And when it was first released, it was unrestricted in China. And immediately, these rooms with thousands of people were popping up in China to discuss what was happening to the Uyghurs. Um, and in that moment, they were speaking quite freely. They were talking about what was happening. And I think it's important to recognize that, as like all things, as monolithic as a culture, a country, a people can seem, when you get down to it, when you actually learn about it and look at it, they are different. There are it's like anything else, you know. There's no real monolith. We're individuals and we make up groups of similarities, of similar interests and hobbies and personalities and beliefs, and then it just continues to build on top of each other there. And that's kind of the thing. The CCP has done a really good job of shutting that narrative and that conversation down. They've managed to really associate themselves as the Chinese people. And by doing that, it's really smart, honestly, because now they've
Yeah.
tied their success to the success of China, and they've also created this situation where criticizing them makes it seem like you're criticizing
Percent.
Chinese people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Shit. Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think like I guess now, yeah, there's not any good allegories besides like I guess one I could think of is, I don't blame, every white person I see for systemic racism. I blame the systems that were created by, yes, white people, but I think it's unfair and unrational to blame or even believe that you're blaming every single white person by criticizing a system. It's just it doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't compute and doesn't make sense. And it's usually, when the right does that to us, when they say, "Oh, you're just trying to make white people feel bad about themselves, or you're trying to make white people feel guilty." It's like, no, man, I'm criticizing the system over here. They're two different entities. White people aren't the American system or the Canadian system. So maybe kind of reframing arguments that way. Yeah, thank you for that. That's a really good point.
Yeah, and I agree. Just it's people benefit from a system, and that should be just in the broader term. People benefit from a system, and that should be acknowledged. But that doesn't mean that they themselves are culpable for the creation of the system until maybe they refuse to acknowledge that the system exists
Mm,
and they're actively working to maintain it.
exactly.
And I think that's kind of when you can call them out as active perpetrators.
Yeah, yeah, that's fair. I have a few prompts here for you, and I would love to you can be as long as or as short as you want, but I'd love to hear your reaction to each of them. So the first prompt I have is Uyghur advocates work for the CIA. We kind of touched on this before, but please, I'd love to hear you address it directly.
Yes.
There you have it, guys. Clip that.
um, yeah, I mean, it it's just outrageous, and it's funny to think that like the Uyghur advocacy movement is this CIA front. I think it's pretty funny, and Uyghur Uyghurs in general will make fun of it. Like, my friends and I will often be like, "Oh, oh shoot, I'm working for the CIA. Where's my check?
Yeah.
Should be in the mail any day now. Um, and I think this is where that conflation of where that conflation we were talking about this off stream, right? Where governments have ulterior motives,
Yeah.
and generally governments will do their best to fulfill or act in their own self-interest, and sometimes those self-interests tend to align with real pressing issues. Human rights are real pressing issues, and the Uyghur genocide is a real pressing issue. Um, and Uyghur activists and advocates are fighting for Uyghur people. And I believe that there are people who listen to us in government, in policy places where they have influence, and they consider this a real pressing issue, and they do their best to advocate alongside us. And I think ultimately what happens is when something becomes when something is done by a government like the United States, where there's a lot of criticism pitched at it for only acting in their interest and ignoring other issues, there's a conflation between what the government is doing in self-interest and what the people who are asking for this help and advocating for these people or this issue, who they are and whether or not they're one and the same. You know, it's a belief that Uyghur activists and Uyghur advocacy is an astroturf movement, whereas in reality, a lot of it is grassroots. A lot of young Uyghurs who are passionate about this and who recognize what's happening and are speaking out from the diaspora. So, you know, just because the US government does something doesn't mean that the Uyghurs or the activists or the advocates for that cause that is finally being addressed are part of that game. Uyghurs don't like being political pawns any more than anybody else.
Yeah.
You know, we want this genocide to end, and we want for the suffering of Uyghurs back home to end. We want to be able to talk to our loved ones. We want to be able to visit home. And there are steps being taken, and not enough, in my opinion. There are a lot of areas of criticism of the West in this regard. They're not doing enough. And if there really was, you know, part of their self-interest to do exactly what we were saying, then I would, you know, I'd hope to see a lot more being done. So just because these interests align does not mean that we're all these paid shills.
Yeah. You
know,
unpaid shills, really.
Basically, yeah.
It's funny because, like, when you consider, you know, right wing grifters, and you know the money being made on the left, like the only prominent example of someone like on the left spouting what can be considered leftist ideals that is making like a significant amount of money is like Hassan and like Hassan Piker, for people that don't know.
Yeah.
But it's just like everybody else, you know, we're not making that kind of money. So it's just like, is he the only, maybe he's the only CIA op, because like, if not, then they're just putting the income inequality in CIA ops is definitely not socialized, and we need to start fighting for CIA op worker rights, because
CIA needs a union.
Yeah.
I was listening to this podcast with Hassan Piker in it.
Yeah.
And they asked him, like, is it hard for you to maintain this kind of like class awareness, right? Because now he's very successful, he's rich, and like he's like, yeah, you know, like I could detach from reality at any point. Like I could just ignore what's happening and live my life however I want it. But it's, he says that, you know, I have to constantly make myself aware that this is not like real for everyone, and that there are people suffering, and it's like there's a class consciousness that needs to be recognized. And so, you know, like that, he got paid, dude. Like he got paid for talking about this stuff. And I don't know that many socialists or like democratic socialists who are actively paid for their opinion, besides pundits on whatever news channel, the Young Turks, stuff like that. And like Hassan Piker was on the Young Turks in the first place.
Yeah.
So like, isn't he the nephew of Cenk Uyghur?
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
There's that.
So his last name is pronounced the same way as Uyghur, like Cenk's.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's Cenk Uyghur.
That's wild.
Cenk Uyghur, yeah.
True.
Unless it's missing an accent or something, that when it got translated into like English Latin from the Turkish Latin alphabet.
True. Interesting. So I got another prompt for you here. This has been one I've seen a few times on either Reddit or Twitter, and it is China is re-educating Uyghur folk because of acts of terrorism committed by Uyghurs.
Whew. Okay. Well, so I hate this because it's just so amazing what people will buy up. So, I mean, just to bring about a little whataboutism in this conversation, um, is is every terrorist group designated by the U.S. a real terrorist group, or is it politically motivated to
Facts.
achieve a goal? You know,
Facts.
like
Black
so.
Panthers.
I mean, look at that, a domestic terror group
Yeah.
uh, that was there as a way to assert the rights and freedoms of Black people in America, and the government got scared, and they decided to label them a terror group so that they can act with impunity.
Yeah.
Destroying city blocks, constant illegal raids, murdering activists that either were or weren't part of the Black Panthers. Like it was a tool, that terror designation.
Yeah.
And these terror attacks, and I say terror attacks because when you have an attack, it is not necessarily motivated in a way that could be classified as terror, but when you take every act of violence and just label it as a terror attack,
Right.
it sure does look like it adds up over time.
Right.
But I think one place where we can like firmly blame the U.S. for this is the war on terrorism. So after 9/11, the U.S. was willing to let anything slide in the name of combating, terrorism, namely Islamic terrorism. And China saw an opportunity there. They, in order to, approve of the U.S. invasion of, I believe, Iraq. It might have been Afghanistan. I don't remember which one right now. I'm going to say Iraq in this case. The U.S. listed the East Turkestan Islamic movement as a terror group. And the only source for their existence and their attacks and anything is a Chinese white paper. The U.S. did no research into this. They didn't look at it at all. They just took this white paper, took it at face value, and designated the ETIM as a terrorist group. And then that same year or the year after, the United Nations did the same thing, taking it from the U.S. In 2020, I believe it was 2020, everything kind of feels like a blur these days.
Yeah, fair.
The ETIM was delisted by the U.S. as a terror group because there was no compelling evidence to prove that it existed or is active.
Wow.
So you should keep that in mind. And what the war on terror allowed the CCP to do is use Islamic terrorism as a pretext for the increase of police activity, police surveillance, and oppression that they carried out in East Turkestan against the Uyghur people. They essentially used it as their false flag operation by finding these acts of violence and compiling an entire list of these, claiming that they're all terrorist attacks, and then using that as a way to justify what they're doing, which, devious, smart, devious.
Yeah.
And so they created this massive police apparatus, and they were able to use this as a way to keep people in check. Even what's something that existed already is the Xinjiang Production and Construction Corps. It's known as Bingtuan. And it is essentially it's a paramilitary force that is in East Turkestan. And the closest thing that you can liken it to is like the British East India Trading Company, which is to say a corporation that is given a blanket check or blank check to do whatever they like to extract resources and generate wealth. So Bingtuan is in East Turkestan, hundreds of thousands of soldiers. They kind of operate as like this parallel structure. And a lot of the forced labor is from Bingtuan. So kids, even before now, during the summer break, would be picking cotton.
Totally.
Or so like you'd fill these quotas whenever you'd have to do this, and it's just gotten worse now. Because there's a mandate, and they have the ability to, and a lot of the labor transfer schemes also come from the XPCC, where they sell lots of Uyghurs, and I don't mean lots like in quantity, but I do mean that. I also mean lots like groups to these companies in labor transfer programs, where then they are working in manufacturing facilities or other kinds of labor, and it's a coerced labor scheme that can effectively be defined as forced labor. Because if you deny it, then clearly you aren't patriotic enough, and you need an education on why this is a good thing for you to do. So you get sent to a camp, you get sent to a prison, or you go and do some good old forced labor.
God damn.
Yeah, and so really the war on terror gave the CCP the perfect excuse to create a huge military and police apparatus inside of East Turkestan, and it had one. It was just able to create a vast network, an advanced platform, checkpoints every corner. When I visited in 2015, visited my family, I went to Hotep, and there were armored personnel carriers on the corner of every street, squads of soldiers running up and down, barbed wire, sheet metal, gun gates, checkpoints at every corner. I was asked for my ID constantly. It was kind of scary, actually. It was terrifying. I remember I was with my uncles and my dad, and we were just talking, and well, a few Uyghur men, that's a threat. So one of the guards opens up this door, and he has a rifle, and he kind of just like peeks out, and he's just looking, because obviously we're suspicious, because we're 4 Uyghur men.
Wild. And I'm sorry. Yeah, to go through that and then be told that you're not real / your your suffering isn't real. It's just it's a whole another beast. The next prompt I got got a few more of these, but we kind of hit a bit of them. The CCP is good because they're communists and oppose American imperial power.
Where do we begin?
Yeah, I went through the depths of Reddit. I've been through the mud and back for you.
Right. So I guess first, I would probably argue that, they're not really communists.
Yeah.
What they have now is state capitalism, which is where you have this massive authoritarian machine that helps run your business very, very smoothly. And that's kind of what it is, right? You have all these state-owned corporations, or even if they were privately started or private companies, all companies in China have to have a party member representative on the board. And that goes for foreign companies operating in China. So you need a board of directors. You need a member on your board there, which now, with the influence that the party has on your company, you have you've introduced this mix between government and business. But wait, isn't that a good thing? Don't you want more government regulation? Uh, in one sense, sure. I mean, you probably want a healthy amount of regulation of businesses. Um, what you probably don't want is a party member who can run or control a company, or a company that is entirely state controlled, that creates, for example, AI technology that can differentiate the faces of Han Chinese and Uyghurs and can pick them out in a crowd. That's kind of that's not great.
It's a little sketch.
Um, a little, just a little bit, you know.
Yeah.
The other aspect of things is, well, one of the big, I guess, maybe open secrets is that the CCP in particular steals technology from other companies. And so when you want to enter into China as a business, you need to do a joint venture. At which point you share technology with this Chinese company that you're working with, and then they are able to just take that and kind of do their own thing.
Right.
Um, but those are general complaints about, business and stuff. If you're I guess if you're a socialist, you're wondering what the difference is. Um, Massive corruption and inequality. I mean, if we're looking at the numbers here, um, wealth resides at the top, really.
Yeah.
Um, and in an autocratic system like that, you see that wealth trickling in, from other companies, from these Chinese companies, and it just goes straight to the top. Maybe trickle wasn't the right word there, because it's trickle down economics, which we know doesn't work.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like, I'm not an economist, and I'm not like an academic in terms of sociology or anything. But what it is clearly not any form of worker-owned means of production. Uh, we're not seeing an equal benefit to all people from this mix of government and business. What we're seeing is the government using these businesses as a way to leverage themselves globally, become competitive, and then become rich. And that does not trickle down, much like it doesn't in anywhere, really, because who likes to give away their wealth?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Definitely not billionaires.
Yeah. And I mean, we're seeing this kind of weird struggle. People have journalists have commented on it before, is that China is kind of, doing battle with their own tech companies to regulate them and to try to tame them, because these are massive companies that are building influence and power, and the CCP wants that. They want that as well. They also don't want them to become so powerful as to be a threat to their own. And so, there's that whole thing about how Jack Ma disappeared for a little bit. But ultimately, like, I think what we want to recognize is, if you're a leftist or a socialist, yeah, you want workers to benefit equally. You want the means of production to be owned by the worker. That's not what we're seeing here. Again, it's this conflation that the CCP has created, where like they are the worker,
Right.
they are the Chinese,
Right.
and in reality, they're a bunch of plundering plutocrats that have run an effective propaganda campaign to keep themselves in power, and have used their desirability as a market to kind of strong arm companies into doing their bidding.
Right. Yeah.
And what was the other part of that? The CCP is
Uh,
communist and it combats U.S. imperialism.
yeah, the CCP is good because they're communists and oppose the American imperial power.
Yeah. So let's see. Imperialist powers. I think there there's no real question about whether or not the US has these tendencies, you know,
Yeah,
or isn't it, or has this imperialist um is an empire, you know, maybe not in a traditional sense, but uh, just put aside the Belt and Road Initiative for a second. Even just putting that aside, looking at China, we see this annexation and occupation of East Turkestan, of Tibet, of Southern Mongolia. We see this saber rattling for you know, Taiwan. Um, and it is it's just so it's frustrating to me. It's really frustrating to me when people say, "Oh, you know, China's not imperialist or China can't be imperialist." What we're seeing in East Turkestan or Tibet is essentially colonialism. It's
yeah,
neo-colonialism. It's a
yeah,
form where there is resource extraction, there's wealth extraction, there's massive inequality, there's systems in place that are based off of a racial hierarchy of sorts.
yeah.
You know, there's a belief in minority quality. I think it's called min. I'm not even gonna try to pronounce it actually because I can't remember what the word is. But it's a belief in minority quality. It's like, oh, the Han Chinese culture and civilization and everything is at the top, and we need to uplift these poor peasants to our level.
Mm,
That is a system that is inherently rooted in Han Chinese supremacy. It's so these systems are designed with this in mind and are an inherently imperialist method of control and
right.
empire. Just just because it's not as big does not make it not an empire. And I think a lot of people seem to forget that, and to not even acknowledge the fact that these vast lands of East Turkestan, Tibet, and southern Mongolia are inhabited by ethnic groups that have a deep tie to this homeland.
Yeah,
You know, and that's something that they like to ignore. Essentially, um, they they call them autonomous zones, and maybe for a period of time there was autonomy,
hmm,
but that did not last long. And what we're seeing now is autonomy is in the name, but it's definitely not in the practice.
mm.
Uh,
It's kind of a
you know,
trend with the CCP, it seems.
yeah, it's like power creep.
Yeah,
You know, it's you kind of you take a little here and there, and then um, the people are okay with it because it's just this one thing, or it's just this other thing, and eventually you have created this total system. Um, One of the things that was being looked at is like educational policies and language, which is so important, and particularly with Tibetans. There was a report released that Tibetans, Tibetan children are placed in these residential schools. And if that sounds familiar to you,
it's because it
it's
is.
because it's a
Yeah,
very similar system
yeah,
where they are taught, you know, Chinese culture and language, and they're not taught Tibetan. And so, with the local educational institutes shut down, what's the only way to give your child an education? It's these schools,
hmm,
and that is a genocide. If we can recognize that Canada's treatment of the First Nations people, and in particular the residential schools, were a form of genocide designed to destroy First Nation cultures, then we can recognize that the same thing happening to other people by another country is also genocide.
Yeah, I agree.
And it's this inability to hold, well, you know what, it's an ability to hold these two thoughts that should come together seamlessly and completely reject it. You know, the
Mm-hmm.
cognitive dissonance you need to have and live with in order to think, oh yes, what's happening here is genocide, but what's happening here is just fine and dandy. We're alleviating poverty.
Yeah, yeah,
This is okay because it's not Canada, it's not the US. This is bad. You know, like
yeah. I mean, people are just. It's easy to say. I guess yeah, U.S. Canada bad, but for some reason that ability just falls really flat when it comes to China, and yeah, it's a disillusionment. Like I said, it's just disillusionment from a great amount of distrust, and one thing that I guess we can be thankful for. I guess we don't have the stats, so we're unable to see if how significant the number of Tankies are representative of like leftists. I would like to hope that they're a small minority and they're not growing, but yeah, I guess I guess we can only hope that we're the vast majority of left thinking people, and I think we are. I hope at
yeah, I
least.
mean, there tends to be they just tend to be very loud.
Yes, yes,
And people pay attention because
so
their
loud.
views are kind of extreme.
Yeah,
Um and so they get a lot of airtime, you know, because people listen to these loud people whether or not they believe in it, they're amplifying their voice,
yeah.
um, and projecting it.
I um, I am not gonna mention the YouTube because I don't want to promote it, but I was watching this YouTube account that I really respected because they were educating leftist ideals, and for the most part, like they weren't, yeah, problematic. But there was this one episode on anti-Asian sentiments or the rise in Asian hate, and they said like their big argument was that this is like an ongoing trend and you shouldn't be surprised. But then when they spoke about China, one, they wouldn't even name the Uyghur people, and two, they kind of said like they said something along the lines like of a hypothetical thing that might be happening in China. And I was just like,
Come
"Holy,
on.
yeah, yeah!" That was like the last video of theirs I watched, and I was like, "All right."
That's
And they
so
were a pretty, like, I'm pretty sure they're a pretty big YouTube channel, which
yeah.
is unfortunate.
That's really unfortunate, you know, because and like that's one of the big things is you don't see a lot of left-leaning progressive leftist groups or people who have an active role in Uyghur advocacy, you know,
Yeah.
like a lot of the Western groups tend to be very much rooted in domestic affairs and tend to counter any criticism of other countries, particularly self-proclaimed socialist or self-proclaimed communist countries, um, and they tend to just defend them and kind of try to return it back to the inherent issues involved in domestic affairs.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important to address issues at home,
Yep.
you know, because there are a lot. I mean, that's the reality of the situation.
Yeah.
But to 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 hypothetically happening,
Yeah.
like, come on,
Yeah. It's
come on.
vile. It's
There
just.
are there are socialist, communist academics out there who are doing this research, and like they're the people producing this body of evidence to show what's happening to the Uyghur people. And these are people who are very left leaning, you know, and they're presenting this research, or they're talking about it. And I don't always agree with all of the things that they're saying, but the reality is that they recognize that something terrible is happening to the Uyghur people, that there are atrocities being committed, and that this is something that needs to be addressed. And when did leftists and progressives stop holding each other accountable for the BS, or the vile, or the vitriol, or the lack of willingness to look at the evidence, and instead parrot a talking point that has been propagated through, left friendly media outlets? As far as I was aware, leftist groups tended to hold each other accountable and call each other out on this kind of stuff. And yet, when it comes to China, they've formed a unified front in a lot of ways, either by actively denying what's happening to the Uyghur people, actively denying what's happening to the Tibetan people, or remaining silent, saying it's not our place to talk about it.
Yeah.
When have human rights not been an issue that need to be addressed and spoken out on?
Exactly. It's never an issue you should remain silent on. We all know and understand that. Yeah, when you choose to remain silent, you're taking, the side of the oppressor. But yeah, I think you pretty much hit the other prompts at some point in here, so I won't make you. I guess this is. I would be interested. I also have something to say about it, but China is a safe and free place, or China is working to make. Sorry. Let me. The CCP is working to make China a safe and free place for all people.
I mean, just speaking, anecdotally, from a personal experience, I did not feel very safe.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm the kind of people that the CCP is trying to keep China safe from. Who knows? But when you start imprisoning and disappearing authors and doctors and academics, what is it that you are keeping safe? What are you trying to prevent? What horrible things? Knowledge? Because that's kind of what it seems like. Dissent? Keep that out. Not in my China. Looking at Hong Kong, what are they keeping Hong Kong safe from? Because as far as I'm aware, it wasn't the protesters who started beating the crap out of other protesters and launching tear gas into peaceful protests and systematically dismantling a democratic process,
Yeah.
So what is it that the CCP is trying to keep China safe from? And I think a good answer to that is probably look at the Great Firewall. Why they refuse to let ordinary citizens access the greater internet, but they let their officials do so. For example, if you're an ordinary Chinese citizen, you can't have Twitter. But you know who has Twitter? The ambassador, the Chinese ambassador.
That one guy. Yeah, I know what you're talking
the
about.
US. They all have Twitter accounts.
Yeah.
So clearly, they're okay with allowing an outward amount of information.
Yeah.
They want information from them to be projected outward, but they close themselves off when it comes to anything that could come to them, and they carefully inspect it. So, in a free society, we allow a free information of thoughts, and that is just clearly not there. So this really needs to, the onus needs to be turned back, is what dangers are they trying to keep China safe from?
Word. Word up, man. Yeah, that's the prompts I had for you, and I could probably say in really good confidence that, you know, once if there's ever a mass migration from Black African countries, I know for damn sure that they won't be knocking on China's door and they won't be let in. So, but that's just, you guys can, you can criticize all you want and say that's hypothetical, but that's my black ass opinion, and I'm sticking to it. What are some ways that people can get involved and participate in, you know, helping out your cause?
Definitely. I mean, I think one of the biggest things is paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
Keep your eyes on the news. Well, maybe don't do that. It's not particularly healthy, but like keep an eye out for Uyghur related stuff, um, so that you know what's happening. Keep yourself educated in some ways. Like understand what's happening. I think that's really important, so that when this kind of conversation comes up, or people who are ignorant about it, you can also share what you've learned with them. You know, knowledge is power.
Right on.
Secondly, if you're in Canada, you should write to your MP and tell them that you support uh, you support the Uyghur people, and that you would like a similar policy to the UFLP, or you would like a vocal expression of support. Um, and you can organize with your friends and your family and other people who agree and have this same perspectives as you do, to talk about this stuff, and to make sure that, sorry,
Oh, good,
that
man.
this stuff is passed, and that this stuff, uh, because right now Canada's forced labor global advisory for Uyghur forced labor is not great. Um, you can go on eBay.ca right now and look up Xinjiang cotton and buy a pair of sheets.
Yikes.
Yeah,
That
so they're not really doing anything, you
that
know?
ain't it. God damn.
So more needs to be done to enforce this.
Yeah.
Asking for similar laws, process like the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act would be a really good way to address this. Working with our allies, more sanctions. If you're in the U.S., it's the same thing here with the Uyghur SOS Act, asking them to um, prioritize P2 status for asylum seekers, Uyghur asylum seekers, so that they're not stuck in some third country where they're at risk of deportation.
Mm.
These are all things that you can take part of in looking at local campaigns. So looking at things like Campaign for Uyghurs, looking at places like World Over Congress, looking at different campaigns like forcedlaborfashion.org to see what actions you can take. No Beijing 2022 for protests or anything that might come up, and paying attention. So some shameless self-promotion here is, if you follow me on Twitter or Instagram, I occasionally will talk about this stuff or post about it or share news and updates and ways that you can get involved. So there's one avenue for you to get your minimum threshold of Uyghur news, but really educate yourself and take that knowledge and share it with others. That's really important.
Amen. I'm also gonna. I'll hit you up sometime after this. I mean, get some resources and compile a resource list that I can host somewhere and share with my followers and stuff.
For sure.
What are your hopes for the Uyghur people in the coming year?
Coming year, I'm hoping, for an end to this genocide. I don't know how realistic that'll be, but that's kind of the end goal. That's our priority at this moment, and seeing more effective targeted sanctions on the CCP officials who are involved, um, the immediate passage of the UFLPA, the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, and like giving those companies like Zara, like Nike, Hugo Boss, all these huge, huge companies that are so complicit in this, a 180-day timer to get their shit together. That would be so satisfying. That would be very satisfying to see. I hope that the Beijing Olympics go terribly. I hope that they decide to upgrade to a full boycott, that athletes decide to not participate. But barring that, I hope that the media coverage is about China's genocide, not about their games. They don't deserve to have their games broadcasted. They don't deserve to be seen as a shining city on a hill when that hill is, made up of corpses. Yeah, like, it'd be nice to see my family there. And that's the same thing for all Uyghurs, It's just, we're in year 5, and it would be nice to see this thing come to an end.
Amen, brother. To end on a lighter note, I would love to know what your favorite thing about Uyghur culture is. It could be like a favorite food, maybe a term that you whatever it may be. I would love to hear that.
Yeah. I love polo. It's not necessarily just an Uyghur food. There's it's kind of like a Central Asian thing. Plov, pilaf, you hear it. I like polo. And I like Uyghurs make
oh
these
man,
two
this
things.
looks fire. I'm looking at pictures of it right now.
Yeah, it's good. You gotta show your audience.
Yeah.
And Uyghur naan and Uyghur kebab. It's just amazing stuff. It's absolutely delicious, and I love it.
What brings Uyghur naan and kebab to another level?
I think it's just so. Uyghur kebab is usually lamb, with the spices involved, like some salt, but like cumin, and it's usually over.
Ooh, I'm
like
looking at
fire.
the kebab right now. That's crazy.
It's good. It's juicy. It's just God, it's amazing. I love it. And I think I can see it. It's served on the naan.
Yeah.
Right, and that Uyghur naan, I love naan. It's that I go.
Oh,
I can't help myself when I get it, And like traditionally, it's made in a thing called a tunur, which is just this big clay oven, and they just like slap it on there.
Oh yeah. I've seen those before. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool.
The food is good.
It looks like thicker than like the naan that I'm used to. It kind of looks like pizza.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It exactly. It's not very thin usually.
Yeah.
And it tends to be soft still, but it's a little bit thicker, and then sesame seeds and onions on the top. That's how my mom makes it. It's just fantastic. So, and one thing I think is that Uyghurs have a rich history of writings and poetry. And this like very short poem, I'll just read it out loud, by Ahmed Jan Osman. It's just four lines. It's called Coda to the 1001 Nights, and this is the English translation. Enough, Shahrazad, that's plenty of tales. I want to leave this endless fright. Give me one single sunlit day over 1,001 long nights. It's just, I don't know what it is about that. Just spoke to me. It's an Uyghur poet. Um, I enjoy that. And if you want to see more culture, like more Uyghur culture and stuff, um, Uyghur Collective on Instagram, that's a really good way to like daily dose of Uyghur culture because there's always photos posted and stuff like that. But yeah,
Sweet.
you know, we're a rich people. We're more than just victims.
Of
And
course, yeah.
I think it's a lot of young Uyghurs are working on cultural preservation through these methods of like teaching about it and learning about it and enhancing and preserving it.
Fire, fire. Well, I still haven't hit up that Uyghur restaurant near me. But now after seeing those pictures, I
Oh yeah,
definitely got to.
you gotta.
But yeah, man, I would love, if you have any closing thoughts. If yeah, actually, one last question, I guess. If there's someone that somehow sits through this and still, is in disbelief, what would you want to say to them?
Yeah, if someone can sit here and listen to an Uyghur person speak about even his own personal experience of what he's seen or uh, had happened or what's happened to his family and can still, you know, completely deny it. I don't know. I don't know what to say to a person like that. You know, do you want me to cut open my hand and show you that I'm not a piece of clay that's animated? You know, but if there's someone who is skeptical about scale or or just wants more evidence and it's in good faith, you can reach out to me and I have plenty of resources to show you exactly why this thing is real, this genocide is real, and the work that academics from all spectrum, all the political spectrum are putting together to show you what's happening, to show the world what's been happening. You know,